Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be continuing along on our journey going into Chapter 3, taking a more deeper look into the founding of General Motors. Now, last time in Chapter 2, which Russell titled Laying the Groundwork for General Motors, we did just that. We got an introduction into Buick and kind of how that came about, to ransom Oldsmobile, or rather, well, Oldsmobile was the car, and it's funny, I think I mentioned this last episode, my grandpa had an Oldsmobile. I remember driving around that thing as a kid. And then, of course, they were decommissioned in the early 2000s. I think 2004, they shut down the Oldsmobile division at General Motors. But Olds Motor Works is like the oldest car company. I mean, it was there before Ford, Buick, before all of this. I think it was started late 1800, just before the turn of the century, 1900. But anyway, we got to see how Billy Durant became involved with Buick from purchasing the interest in it from a gentleman, James Whiting, because the valve was, if you guys remember from the previous presentation we did. And then, of course, later on, Chapter 2, we talked about Ransom Olds. We got a little bit further away from Detroit because Olds Motor Works was founded in Lansing, but still overall Michigan area. And today we're going to just, like I said, continue along and take a look at the founding of General Motors. And we're going to start, let me see if I can get this, the first slide. There it is. The meeting. Now this, I feel like every presentation I've said this, something that I never quite knew about as far as the automotive history here in Metro Detroit, here in Michigan, was this meeting that took place. Now, the meeting, just a little bit of a backstory on this. Well, I'll tell you what the meeting was about. The meeting was between Billy Durant merging. So this was something that I didn't know, that at one point in time, there was a concerted effort to merge Buick, because it wasn't GM at the time, right? This GM name didn't come about until later. But Billy Durant tried to merge the Ford Motor Company, or was it Ford Motor Company at this time, 1904? Yeah, I think it was, but Henry Ford's automobile company, right? Because Henry Ford, remember, had two before Ford Motor Company and the injection of capital via Alexander Malcolmson. He wanted to merge Henry Ford's company, Ransom Olds' company, his company, Buick, and then Benjamin Briscoe had an automotive company as well. I think kind of lesser known, and it was based out of New York because he got an injection of capital from J.P. Morgan and his company. They wanted to have an automotive company closer to New York, so Benjamin Briscoe's company was stationed, one of like the main plants was stationed on the Hudson River, operating out of New York. They wanted to keep a close eye on it. I'm kind of jumping around all over the place. Let's get into this, though. Benjamin Briscoe. All right, so Benjamin Briscoe calls up Billy Durant in 1904. I know, I'm almost like, they had phones at this time? Man, at this time, Billy has become a part of Buick. Remember that Briscoe sold his investment in Buick to James Whiting. James Whiting then, what we learned in the previous episode, in Chapter 2, James Whiting then convinced Billy Durant to come on board onto Buick, and this is where the fabled story goes where he rents him a Buick because Billy Durant didn't think that this automobile stuff was going to take off. Remember, he was making carriages. He had a company called the Durant and Durant Carriage Company. Durant and Dort Carriage Company. I just said that 4 times fast. For horses. He didn't think the car thing was going to take off until that Buick was rented out to them. Right? James Whiting told him, hey, just take it for a spin, see what you think. And he had like a religious conversion, is what Russell writes. Well, now, Billy's got a part of Buick. And they're looking to do a merger. A merger, which is kind of similar to what happened in the steel industry when a bunch of steel companies were merged together to form U.S. Steel. And one of the components of this merger was a very famous entrepreneur. You might have heard of him, Andrew Carnegie. His company got merged in with all these other U.S. steel companies. I'd have to do a little more deep dive into that. But the same thing, they wanted to do an automotive merger. And Benjamin Briscoe had called up Billy Durant and wanted to talk to him about it. A lot of the sourcing that I have for this too, guys, is... And I'll put this in the description. This link to the description. There's a website, Leadership Now. Birth of a General, the General Motors story, which is actually the article is based from a book, Billy, Alfred, and General Motors. So a lot of this is coming from there, and I got it pulled up here in case I need to reference it. But yeah, Briscoe's got this idea. They want to do an auto merger. Originally, they wanted to bring together 20 companies, but dwindled the list down to Ford, Maxwell Briscoe, REO, which is Ransom E. Olds, REO Motors, and Buick. J.P. Morgan had given Briscoe the loan to buy Maxwell's automotive company. And again, New York is starting to take notice of this automotive industry that's been burgeoning in Michigan. They give Briscoe a loan to buy this automotive company. And the intention seeming from what I was reading was they want to get a little bit of a taste into it. Seems like they're making money. They want to have it operate out of New York, though, so they can kind of, quote unquote, maybe keep an eye on it. And let's go to the next slide. Oh, please don't. There we go. Okay. So a meeting takes place. Actually, a couple meetings. There's first this meeting, and Russell kind of plays out what the conversation might look like in chapter 3 here. There's a meeting at the Penobscot building, which is Penobscot. Say that 4 times fast. Which is a building in Detroit. The meeting there is seemingly like an introductory meeting between Ford, Ransom Olds, Benjamin Briscoe, Billy Durant. And they're starting to come up with a plan to merge those 4 companies together. And they are trying to gather numbers and see how much each of these individual companies is worth. And I remember in this passage on what each company is worth. So Durant himself broached the subject of value of the companies, throwing out a figure of $10 million for Ford Motor, $6 million for REO, $5 million for Maxwell Briscoe, but not offering a figure for Buick. So that was kind of interesting. It almost seems like he doesn't value it nearly as much, and he just doesn't want to reveal the value, in thinking that the value is much lower, but he doesn't want to reveal it to the other guys in the room to then have a lower stake at the negotiating table. Because if you come in and say, oh yeah, my company's worth less than $1 million, you got all these other companies that are worth way more than mine, now all of a sudden they could maybe block you out of the merger. Like, well, this company's not worth anything. Why would we want to merge with it? And it's funny, Billy said, oh, the report of the appraisers and auditors and the conditions and the terms of the agreement would answer that question. So it's like, oh, we're still kind of looking at it, but yeah, we don't have the numbers right in front of me. So they're meeting at the Penobscot building, which at the time was Detroit's tallest building, which is still around today. And they're kind of having like a little bit of a back and forth, because some tough questions are starting to be asked about the dirty details of the merger negotiations, like how will the entity be managed? Who would be the boss? How would the different companies be represented in management? And there starts to form two sides. There's the Briscoe side, who was suggesting that everything be consolidated down to one thing, and a central committee essentially controls the whole of this conglomerate. And remember, the name General Motors hasn't come up yet. They don't have a name for this yet, but Briscoe wants to keep everything centrally planned in one entity. Centrally planned. Kind of sounds like a certain thing, but not uncommon. I wouldn't say among many companies who go through mergers. Now, Billy Durant doesn't want it to operate this way. So he wants it to operate as each company operating as its own individual component. They don't interfere with each other. The companies just operate as they were. And there's a joke that's thrown around in this meeting. Briscoe came back jokingly with, ho, Durant is for states' rights, and I am for a union, is the joke that Briscoe puts out there. So the meeting goes on. They actually end up having multiple meetings. Again, getting into the nitty-gritty and into the details of what it would take to merge everybody together. Ford ends up kind of objecting to this merger because he doesn't think it's going to help him out. It's not going to help the people out. He thinks that by merging, prices are going to shoot up, and he wants to keep prices down. Workers could afford a car that like every man could afford. Ford's experiences, especially with his first two companies, where he was very race car oriented, if you guys remember us talking about that, he was trying to build a race car, and the people that were backing like Detroit Automobile Company and the Henry Ford Company wanted him to push the cars that would be more profitable. And Henry was just focused on the racing aspect. So he's coming into this thinking, well, this is all just to make money, and I'm in this to build a good car for the masses. So it doesn't sound like Ford is too keen on the idea of merging. But even with this, Durant was confident that they could still get a deal done. So what did they need to do? One of the things they needed to do was Billy had to get authorization to act on behalf of the Buick shareholders, which he did end up getting. Then they needed some audits and appraisals that needed to be completed. I'm assuming here they needed to appraise like the actual value of all the other companies and not just have like Billy throw out some numbers and then he doesn't even throw out the number that Buick was worth at the time. And then there's going to be some underwriting and issuance of stock in the new company. So this is where JP Morgan's company would come in and do this. Again, they had experience doing this with the merger of the steel companies into U.S. Steel. So this is kind of like their JP Morgan's bread and butter. Well, Ford comes in and he just rejects this whole thing because he doesn't want stock in this newly formed company. And Russell highlights this in the book too, where Ford wanted cash from the merger. Now, I pose the question here is, why do you think this could be? And it might be just from his experience in the past. You know, Ford was probably cash strapped. He didn't have a ton. You know, he was always getting stock. Like he got stock in Detroit Automobile Company. He got stock Henry Ford Company. And he kind of got screwed out of it because those companies, you know, they failed. And of course, we learned that the Henry Ford Company, Henry Leland came in and then they turned that into Cadillac, which ends up being bought by General Motors. But he might be just done with stock. Like, no, I don't want stock. I don't want stock in a company that has a high likelihood of failing. Just give me the cash. So Ford proposes something, and this is also what's written in this blog post, in this article from leadershipnow.com, was Ford wanted $4 million in cash paid out over 3 years. He wanted also an additional $2 million up front, $4 million in cash extra paid out over 3 years, and then the remainder of the value in stock for a total of $8 million. So an $8 million total value, $4 million over 3 years, $2 million up front, the rest in stock. So he didn't get everything in the stock. It sounded like the other members of this merger were going to get everything, most of it in stock. But the deal never goes through. So Billy Durant was going to facilitate Ford's demands here, but his bank wouldn't give Billy the loan for the $2 million that Ford needed up front in order to do the deal in this bank, National City Bank of New York. So the deal sounded like it was so close to happening, but because Billy couldn't get the financing to give Ford that $2 million up front, the deal didn't go through with Ford involved in it. That is. Oh, don't skip a slide. Did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Okay, that's good. There we go. So he kind of moves forward without Ford. In 1908, he takes a train to Lansing, Michigan. Again, this is where Olds Motor Works is. And he's given a tour of Olds Motor Works by Fred Smith. And then the story goes, on this tour, he starts negotiating a deal to bring Olds Motor Works and Buick Manufacturing, Buick Motor Company together. They're going to take 75% of the outstanding shares in Oldsmobile for a stake in the new holding company, which is called General Motors. Now, this is where the General Motors name comes in because, again, they're still working with JP Morgan and the associates of JP Morgan. There's actually a guy by the name, a specific guy from JP Morgan, Satterally, I think his name is. Herbert Satterly which I think Herbert Satterley, let me look this up for you guys really quick because I think he's related. He's related to J.P. Morgan. He married into the family. But he also had like a couple other, so this is just from Wikipedia. Because he had some other positions too, like he worked in the government. Yeah. Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Theodore Roosevelt from 1908 to 1909. Yeah, plus he was a lawyer, businessman. And November 15th, 1900, he married Louisa Pierpont Morgan, the oldest daughter of J. Pierpont Morgan. There we go. That's how he came about into the Morgan family. And then he actually committed suicide. Died in 1947. That's very interesting. So anyway, J.P. Morgan, one of the associates of J.P. Morgan actually comes up with that name, General Motors, because they're trying to figure out, United Motors, International Motors. And they finally settle on General Motors. I'm trying to find the part. The part where they mention the name. Oh, here we go. Satterley sent Durant a letter recommending the name General Motors Company. It was a name that his firm had come up with and had researched to make sure it was not being used by any other manufacturers or supplier. After checking again to make sure that Smith and Oldsmobile were still in, Durant instructed Satterley to proceed with drafting and filing the papers of incorporation for General Motors. The deed was done on September 16th, 1908. And General Motors forms. And it's a holding company, I believe, is how this is drafted. So General Motors is formed. Oldsmobile is merged into General Motors. Then Billy wants to propose the sale of Buick into General Motors too. I found this kind of interesting as well, that the papers for filing this incorporation were done in New Jersey, because New Jersey law had no restrictions on the amount of stock a company might issue, regardless of its actual assets. So it reads, he thus had virtual free rein to use his new baby to generate capital through the issuance of new stock. A game he had learned to play much better than his father during his 2-year sojourn in New York. So I guess Durant used to work in New York City. I don't know, in some sort of city. Let's go to the next slide. So there you have it. Now, Oakland enters the picture, and GM ends up adding this other company called Oakland Motor Company, which was founded in 1907, founded by a gentleman named Edward Murphy and a small group of people. Plant was located in Pontiac, Michigan, and this is where the name of the car, Pontiac, comes from. Is because this is where they were operating out of, Pontiac, Michigan. And Pontiac, Pontiac, well, you see them, the G6s, that was a Pontiac, or the Firebird, that was a Pontiac. GM comes into the picture in 1909, so literally like super fast. It's founded in 1907. It does some sales, 1907, 1908. GM comes in 1909, acquires about half the company, which later becomes all of the company when Edward Murphy, the founder, passes away. And GM's on its way to acquiring. It's crazy. We're going to talk more about this too, the different philosophies between how Billy Durant decided to go about business and how Ford Motor Company decided to go about business, where Billy Durant sought to acquire and merge other car companies into the GM name, whereas Henry Ford just kept building up his own brand and releasing new models every so often. So two different kind of styles. And yes, Buick ends up getting under the GM name. Like I said, Cadillac does too. Oldsmobile. Did I say Buick? Yeah, I mean, I think I said Buick already. Pontiac, along with Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac, became a major division of GM. 1911, he added a truck division, General Motors Company, GMC, by combining Rapid Motor Vehicle Company of Pontiac and Reliance Truck Company of Lansing. So GMC, that's a brand that's around today as well. Super interesting, man. We're starting to see how GM is being formed. We're starting to see how JP Morgan, maybe not JP Morgan himself, because I got to look up. I think JP Morgan by this time, 1908, I think he had passed away. Here, we'll take a look really, really quick. J. Pierpont Morgan. 1830s. Oh, okay, so he passed away in 1913. Okay. But super interesting how Morgan was involved in this. New York was involved in trying to merge everything. Henry Ford almost merged in with Billy Durant's company, as well as Olds and Briscoe's company. Super, super interesting. And there's the link if you guys want to look at the details of the story. I'm going to try to get a blog post. That might be my next blog post. Just kind of the relationship between how JP Morgan helped to kind of broker this merging of these car companies, and how GM ended up just taking that formula and running with it and just adding more and more car companies. Like I said, we're going to see Chevrolet come into the picture later. We're going to see Cadillac come into the General Motors picture later. This is going to be a little bit further down the book, but guys, thank you very much for listening this far. I really, really appreciate it. This is a cool history lesson that I'm really enjoying, and I hope you are too. Please check out the blog. I have a couple blog posts related to a couple of the topics that we brought up in the first couple chapters of Russell Duray's book, Motor City Drama, which I don't know if I got to put links to. Oh, I should do that. I got to put links to where you can buy the book on Amazon. Yeah, guys, I really, really appreciate it. You might not see an episode for 2 weeks, just as a heads up. I'll be out of town this week, but we'll see you. We'll see you soon. We'll see you next time. We'll go over to Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.